think I might want to make a wooden railway model of this, like a little custom. Maybe call it Little Mountain, because I'm curious to know how this would probably look. What, you thought I was going to reveal the final product now? Sorry, buddy, you're going to have to wait till the end of the video. I would spoil the surprise if I already revealed it to you. So I decided to construct a model of the Baltimore and Ohio 420s. I don't know if they have an official name or not. On trains, I've seen them named as the Norses. In Railway Empire, they're called the Jervis. I don't know what to call it. I'm just gonna call it the B&O 420. But yeah, I finally built one from scratch. I was originally planning on maybe trying to modify an old Thomas Wooden Railway body and chassis and all that, but it just turns out I just needed to build it on my own. And this video will show you the process of how I did it. Before we begin, I would like to shout out Big City Studios, as not only was I inspired to do this after watching one of his videos, but also most of the techniques I used here I learned from watching said videos. Link to his channel is in the description. Another thing I would like to mention before we begin, though you can follow along to create your very own little mountain, I wouldn't consider this a tutorial, as this is my very first time doing something like this, and I would change a few things that I did here for next time. But without further ado, let's begin. We begin with the chassis of the locomotive. I got the dimensions from Wood Rosie. Now I know what some of you might be thinking, why, oh why would I use a stupid low quality model? Simple. For some reason, the wood chassis are actually shorter than the conventional 060 chassis that was used for the regular wooden railway line. And I figured this is a small engine after all, so surely it could go with a small chassis. I started by cutting out pieces of cardboard and gluing them into place to form a rectangular shape. And then I ended up covering it all in masking tape. I assume the reason for this is because the edges of the cardboard have holes in them, so it would prevent those holes being visible. I then proceeded to poke a hole through the chassis, as this would be the main driving axle. I would move on to the leading axles later, but for now, we have to construct the driving wheel. To accomplish making the wheels, I took your conventional Elmer's glue stick and just traced it around the cardboard, and then I just cut out the circles. I cut out 2 for each wheel, as that would make the wheels more thicker. Then once that was done, I took some paper like cardboard and glued it around the wheel, and then would trim off the edges. And there, the driving wheels were complete. When creating the axles, I used a small wooden dowel and attached it to one of the wheels. Then I put the dowel through the hole, glued the other wheel on, and boom, the main driving wheels were done. Now, going forward, I won't be using the wooden dowel, and I'll come to why that is. To make sure I had enough clearance for the bottom of the chassis against the wheel, I added another piece of cardboard on top and taped that over too. Now it was time to make the leading axles. Now you may be wondering why I decided to make these wheels later when I was making the driving wheels, and it's simple. I wanted to make the leading wheels smaller than the driving wheels to replicate the prototype. And I felt it would look a little bit too stupid if I made the driving wheels bigger and had the leading wheels be the same size as a conventional wooden railway wheel. So I ended up making those by tracing around one of the magnets, and while I did this, I also ended up cutting out the tender wheels too, as they would end up being the same size. Then, same process as before, I ended up gluing 2 pieces of circular cardboard back to back to make a thick wheel, and then wrapped the paper-like cardboard around it to make it smooth. When it came to gluing the axles, I decided I would use cutout Q-tips as the axles, as from Big City Studios videos, that is what he used, and in hindsight, they are smaller than the wooden dowels, and thus I wouldn't have to poke so big of a hole. So I ended up doing that instead. Then I poked 2 more holes through the chassis, and now we have ourselves a 420 chassis. Admittedly, it is a little bit difficult to tell that the 4 leading wheels at the front are smaller than the driving wheels, but they're still smaller, and I'm still happy with that. Next up was to make what I would call the magnet holders of the chassis. To make the magnet holders, I ended up taking a smaller circular magnet, tracing it around cardboard, and cutting it out 8 times. Then I ended up gluing 3 pieces back to back instead of 2, which left me with 2 extra. And then, like the wheels, I glued the paper-like cardboard around them and stuck each magnet holder at the front and back of the chassis. And now came the frame of the main body. The chassis ended up being 3 cardboard pieces tall. However, you might notice that they're not all perfectly rectangular, and that is because I didn't want any bits sticking out from the side, as obviously there's no running board on the prototype. But it's not like that all the way. For the front half of the frame, all 3 pieces of cardboard have a rectangular bit at the front to represent the buffer beam, and then on the back, the top 2 pieces had what I would use as the running board. Once they were cut, I glued them together, covered them with masking tape, and then glued them to the chassis. It was here I decided to give the chassis a test run to make sure it would run on wooden railway track. Success! With the chassis now confirmed to work on the tracks, I moved on to the main body. First, I constructed the smoke box. It only used 3 pieces of cardboard, 2 for the front and back, shaped like the front of Stanley's smoke box. That's literally the best way I can think to describe it. And then I had this long piece of cardboard and just wrapped it around the smoke box. Then, you know the drill, tape it over masking tape and glue it onto the body. Next was the boiler. Now, the way Big City Studios accomplishes the boiler is by using a wooden dowel. However, I didn't have one available, at least not one that would be able to fit the size I wanted it. So I had to once again make my own. So I cut out 2 circular pieces of cardboard, cut out a long strip of cardboard, and wrapped that around the 2 circular pieces. This was a little bit tedious because you had to make sure that the circle piece did not fall over while the glue is drying, while also making sure you hold the pieces on long enough for the glue to dry and stick in place, while also making sure you don't accidentally glue your hands to the cardboard. But anyway, the boiler got done. Yes, it might not be a perfect circle, but it would do. But after that, covered it up with masking tape and glued it to the body. And then came the firebox, which is anything but your usual conventional firebox. Because instead of having a boxy firebox, or in some cases where it's rounded at the top to match the boiler, the firebox on the 420s are like a vertical boiler that merges with the horizontal boiler and has a dome shape at the top. Yeah, this was going to be tricky to attempt to replicate. Nevertheless, I cut out some more circles, and even a half circle, and 2 quarters of a circle. This would help me make the dome shape at the top. Then, with each circle piece, and differently for each circle piece, I would cut out little segments from them, so that way they can integrate their shape into the boiler, with the only piece not getting this treatment was the topmost circle. Then I stacked them all on top of each other, making sure I got the order right, and glued them all together. And as for what would be the dome shape at the top, I took the circle that I didn't cut out, glued the half circle vertically on it, took the 2 quarters of a circle, and also vertically glued it on. This way, when I covered it with masking tape, it would allow there to be a dome shape. I also did the same with the main firebox body, but not all the way around. And then I glued that body onto the boiler. However, I didn't like the dome as I felt it was a little bit too tall. So I scrapped it and created another dome frame. However, instead of making it perfectly half, I cut into it a little bit more, so that way the dome shape would be shorter, and I felt it made it look a little bit better. Then I added masking tape where it needed to be, so that way there wouldn't be any obvious gaps. Now was the point where the engine was beginning to take shape. Next up, I cut out a semi-half circle to represent the smoke box door. Then I made the cylinders, taking smaller holes and smaller strips of cardboard, and basically doing the exact same thing I did with the boiler. Once I got those two, I put masking tape over it and glued them each side of the smoke box, and made sure to angle them as per the prototype. Then I glued the funnel, which, again, used the exact same method. 2 circles, 1 long piece of cardboard, wrap it around. And then we come to try and make the top of the funnel, which tapers out at the top. I didn't really know how I would accomplish this, so I just took a small circular piece of cardboard and a slightly larger circular piece of cardboard and another strip, and attempted to make the shape right. If I thought the boiler was hard to make, this was on another level of difficulty. In fact, on the final image, you can even see that the top circular cardboard doesn't even sit on it flatly, because that's just the best I was able to get it. And you might also notice that the strip of cardboard was cut in half, as I realized that that was the better way I was going to achieve this shape. But man, oh man, this took me so long to do. But anyway, I covered it in masking tape, glued it onto the top of the funnel, and it doesn't look too tapered. But honestly, it's better than nothing. It was the best I was going to get. So after that whole fiasco, I ended up gluing the funnel on top of the smoke box. Now I know what you're all going to say about the funnel. It's too tall for the loading gauge. Yes, I am well aware of that. I am well aware of that when I did create the model. But picturing this thing with a shorter funnel in my mind made it look so stupid. It just looks way better with a tall funnel. Finally, I cut out some more Q-tips to make the railings on the back of the engine. And the main body, besides the paint, was complete, but I would save the painting till later. Now, we move on to the tender. Using a Spencer tender as the basis, which, funnily enough, I only have his tender and not himself, I created the chassis by cutting out some cardboard, gluing it together, covering it in masking tape, poking some holes, creating the wheels, which I had already created before, and yeah, the process is basically the same. Once I did create the chassis, I gave it a test on the wooden railway track. Another success. After that, I created 2 more magnet holders and glued them on each side of the chassis. The frame of the body was straightforward. I just had to cut out 3 pieces of rectangular cardboard and stack them on top of each other. Once again though, the tender frame doesn't stick out like a usual wooden railway frame, and that's because on the prototype there's this ugly green gap between the top of the wheels and the bottom of the tender body that I don't really like, but it's prototypical, so I'd have to model it. Yes, I know the tender looks wonky in this image, just bear with me, okay? And then comes the main body of the tender. Taking the actual width of the Spencer tender, I created a base for it, put 2 large rectangles on each side, a smaller rectangle at the back, and had these 2 even smaller rectangles go at the front. You might be wondering why I'm not making this perfectly rectangular, and it's simple. I wanted there to be a place to stick the wood/cold load. I say wood/cold load because I have no idea what this thing burns. The trains model burns coal, the Railway Empire model burns wood. I'm pretty sure the Lafayette replica burns wood. I couldn't tell from the images I got. I don't know. I even tried looking it up and found nothing. So for this exact reason, I just left it empty. Please, in the comments, let me know what on earth this thing burns, so that way I can add it into the tender and have this model officially complete. because at the moment it's just running empty. Now the tender's looking pretty hollow, so I ended up cutting out some more pieces of cardboard to fill in the inside of where the walls of the tanks would be. And then I got the dimensions to the top, cut out those exact dimensions onto another piece of cardboard, and glued that on top. Then I covered it with masking tape and added it onto the chassis. Now it was at this moment that I realized that the tender was looking a little bit too big. But I put too much effort into this tender to toss it away. But don't worry, when Little Mountain does inevitably appear in the Wooden Railway series, I will give an in-universe explanation of why he has a bigger tender than what his prototypes would normally have. But anyway, once that was glued on, I cut out these bits. Okay, I'm gonna be for real with y'all. I don't really know what this part of the tender is called, but they're there. They stick out at the top, and they're triangular shaped. So I cut that out and glued it onto the top. And last but certainly not least for the tender, I took 4 circular pieces of cardboard, one of which was bigger than the others, wrapped them with the paper light cardboard, glued them on top of each other, and stick it on the tender as a representation of the water filler cap. And there, the tender shape was complete. Now, it was time to paint. The specific colors I used was Craft Smart's Holiday Green, Craft Smart's Black/Noir, and Apple Barrel's Pavement color, which I started with that. I ended up painting the smoke box, funnel, and firebox this color. Now, it looked darker at the time, but as it did dry, it slowly started looking a little bit more and more gray, but even then, it was a dark enough gray. As for why I also didn't paint the cylinders, from the images of Lafayette I was able to find, the cylinders did look to be a darker color than the smoke box, so basing it off of that, that's what I went with. While I waited for that to dry, I used the Craft Smarts black and painted the chassis of the tender black. This also included the rims of the wheels, but not the full wheels as per the prototype, and that's because I like how the green wheels look as they are in trains, so I would end up painting the wheels green, but the rims of the wheels would end up being black. Painting the rims of the wheels was slightly tedious, as when I was applying paint, I had to make sure not to get it on where the green would show on the wheels. Oh, and did I ever mention that I also painted the backs of the wheels too, along with the axles? Yeah, I ended up doing that too, which wasn't as bad as trying to paint the rims. I had to do this on both sides, even while the paint was slightly drying. Thankfully, with this color, it seemed to be able to dry fast enough for me to be able to roll the wheels around without taking any of the paint off. While the tender chassis dried, I did the exact same thing with the exact same color on Little Mountain's chassis, while also painting his cab area and his cylinders. Then came the green. I painted the entire tender, realized I would need a few more coats, and painted the wheels too. After I painted the tender, I went back to the locomotive to paint the boiler, the buffer beam, and the wheels green. A few more green coats later, the paint job was done. Next up, I had to glue on the magnets. I used 3 3/8 of an inch magnets and 1/4 of an inch magnet. And after making sure each magnet was facing the right way, I glued 2 of the larger magnets on both sides of Little Mountain, put the smaller magnet on the front end of the tender, and the larger magnet on the back end of the tender. Finally was the decals. I went onto Adobe Illustrator to create them. This is where I created the tender lettering and nameplates. After which, I printed them out, cut them out, and glued them on, with the final thing I ever did to the locomotive was christening it with its name. And with that, he's finished. And steaming into camera now is the now complete Little Mountain. For a first-time custom, especially scratch build, I'd say I did a pretty great job with him. We're just kidding, characters, they're not important. Anyway, yeah, I'm pretty proud of how this came out. Of course, the Tundra does dwarf him, but as stated before, there was no way I could make it smaller. And I guess too, compared to other wooden railway engines, he is tall thanks to his obnoxiously tall funnel that breaks the loading gauge. But I don't see that as a bad thing. I mean, if wooden railway Steven would probably be as tall as a regular engine, with his funnel being compromised in the process, surely Little Mountain can do the same while not compromising his funnel. Here he is compared with the other 420, Oscar, who in the wooden railway series, I actually don't consider him a 420. He's actually a 440, which explains why he looks a little bit more modern than a 420, but that's just not shown in the wooden railway model, and that wouldn't really be necessary to change. Of course, his wheel is of course way bigger than the conventional wheel, but since Little Mountain is supposed to be smaller, I just wanted to make the driving wheels the same size as the conventional wheel, and make the front pilot wheels smaller. As to why I chose the name Little Mountain, I wanted it to have the name of something that was like small but mighty. And the first name that came to mind was Little Giant, but of course, that name has been taken. So I thought of something else, and Little Mountain was what came to mind, and the name just stuck. Wanted to give a quick curve demonstration. He does indeed go around curves. And this is why I had to make the magnet here smaller. Big City Studios also does this with his customs. But it's because, you see, these magnets are flat compared to your conventional wooden railway magnets, which are round in the front. And so if it was something like this, where both magnets are the same size, it just wouldn't make it around the curve. As you can see, the Tundra immediately derailed. Thankfully, there is no scenario I can think of that would involve something like this happening. It would just be like this all the time. But yeah, that is my first ever wooden railway custom, Little Mountain, who the next time you'll see him will be debuting in the wooden railway series. I guess while we're here, I should probably mention the video schedule for the rest of this month and into the next month. The wooden railway series, I have been hearing all your comments wanting more, and I will get more, but there are other videos in the works that will take priority. So the next video you'll end up seeing is the story on how I missed out on the Bachman, Texas, aka my biggest regret in the Mall Railroad hobby. As a little quick thing to get out before the end of the month. After that, I have another big video coming, so if you saw the community post that mentioned how I was on beach vacation, what I was also doing there was recording for a beach video, which I was hoping to get out this month, but pushing it back to next month, and that's because college and stuff is just now starting up for me, so I have to add that onto my list of priorities. But when that video comes out, I will turn my full attention to the Wooden Railway series, the 3 episodes I mentioned in the Lord Clockwork show, and an extra episode that introduces Little Mountain, though that one probably won't be released around the same time as the other 3, because I still need to come up with a plot for that episode besides Little Mountain joins the crew. But, yeah, that's what I have for now. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye!